Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good to see you. My name is Simret. I come from Germany, as you can see. I'm going to speak about when the rubber meets the road, how to let the Bible speak into our times. It's good to have all of you here. You're here for a reason. There are many exciting topics that are running here, and I'm happy that you chose this one. You know, I have become an Adventist some 20 years ago, and one of the things that have fascinated me about the Adventist community, especially when it comes to its history, is that the young men and women who are in this community, who started it for that matter, were pretty much involved with the Bible and with the times in which they lived. And in a time of optimism in the 19th century, when many people were pretty optimistic about a new millennium coming up, where people thought we're going to bring about positive change in this world, people like William Miller challenged the science of their times and they said, ultimate change is not going to come from within this world, but from without, right? So they had the courage to confront the way things were approached in their times head on. But at the same time, in the course of the Adventist story, they would relate to people holistically and try to deal with social justice issues like abolition of slavery, or they would make it a point to help people to have a holistic type of life, and have an emphasis on education as well, right? So they were in this dialectics or in the situation of, you know, challenging the times in which they lived head on, and at the same time relating to people with their needs, and that kind of exploded in a way, right? As the movement grew, and many people were reached out, and ultimately, many of us are here today, coming from different backgrounds, identifying with this Adventist story, so to speak, right? And one of the things I kind of grappled with for years is the question, how do we relate the story of the Bible to our lives and to the people of our times? And, you know, many times I feel like that we read the Bible with religious glasses, as people who kind of have an idea of what's going on there. And we have this burden of sharing it with others, and this burden is coupled with the idea that what we share is actually the truth. And as such, we have the sense of responsibility to reach out to people. And in a way, that's good, right? If you have a burden, and if you sense like this is the good news that have been passed on to us, and that we have experienced and we would like to share it with others, it's a good thing. But on the other side, I sense that many people around us don't have a relationship to the Bible as we do. And sometimes I even sense that our relationship to the Bible as Christians or as Adventists is kind of overloaded with a whole package of what we want the Bible to say, of what we believe about the Bible, and many times we have discussions running with other people on the credibility of the Bible, and we try to establish the credibility of the Bible before we move on and try to read the Bible with our friends. So, to bring it in this room and have the interaction start right out with you. How many of you have non-Adventist or non-Christian friends? Can I see your hands, right? And how many of you had a debate about the credibility of the existence of God, or He does not exist, or the Bible is true or not? This kind of topics, anybody had that, right? So many of us had that and would have many times this fruitless debates about what to believe and what not to believe. I want to start with an experiment which I did a few years ago, and then ask you a question, and we're going to plunge into the text and see what happens in the next half an hour, right? It was 2004, 2005. I was doing my master's in theology in Friedensau in Germany. And they have this social sciences program there as well running. So you'd have people studying there coming from all kinds of backgrounds. And there was a young lady from an atheistic background who wanted to study social work at the university. And she had no idea about the Bible or Christianity for that matter. She just came there to that university to study social works. But since she found herself in a Christian context, she thought it would be a polite thing to do to kind of know what Christianity is about and what the Bible is about, right? So through a friend, we met up, and she asked me, can you tell me about the basics of Christianity? I want to know more. I have an atheistic background, but I want to know more. And then I said to her, okay, let's try something, right? Let's read the Bible together. And you should know, during that time, I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine who was doing his master's in theology in Holland. And we were having this conversation about having a literary approach to the Bible, which means reading the Bible like any other book, right? As if it would be fiction, and it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. You just read it and see where the story takes you, right? So it was an idea that my friend brought up, and I thought it's an interesting thing. So let's work with that. Let's experiment with that. So I made the suggestion to the young lady, and I said, it doesn't matter what you believe or don't believe. It doesn't matter, wherever you come from. Let's just read the Bible as if it's any other book, right? And it doesn't matter whether what we read is true or not. We just read it like fiction, right? And in a fiction, even serpents can talk. Nobody's going to go like, hey, what does a serpent talk? It doesn't work that way, right? It doesn't matter. So read it as if it's any fantasy book. And let's just get into it and see where the story takes us. So said and done, we started reading. And it was really amazing for me to read the Bible with that person, because she read it with fresh eyes. And one of the challenges that we have as Christ followers or as Adventists is that we have this notion, or I should call it this illusion, of knowing what the Bible is about, right? So when we read it, we have all this kind of preconceived ideas, and we know where the story is going to run. So it's just like watching a movie I've watched quite a few times, and I know how the story is going to turn out, right? And that is kind of a hindrance for us not to encounter the text anew. But with that person, it was a whole new encounter, because for her, everything that she was reading was new. So I was challenging myself to read the Bible as if I had no idea of what's going on there. So what I tried to do with her, and that's what I tried to do for the past 10 years or so, is that I start reading the Bible and reading it as if I have no idea what's going on. So if it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, I go like, oh, there is a God, right? He created the heavens and the earth. Oh, okay, interesting. And then it goes on to say, and God spoke, let there be light. This God, whoever he is, he can speak, right? He can speak. And amazingly, when he says, let there be light, there is light. So whoever this God is, he seems to be pretty powerful, right? Whatever is going on here. And then the story goes on, and God gives names to the things that he creates, gives them personality, and he looks at things and says they are good, yeah. And he's pretty creative in terms of the great variety of things that he creates. So just on the basis of Genesis 1 sharing with us a story, we learn a lot about God, whoever he might be, right? So interestingly, you don't have this concept of God coming up and say, these are 10 things I want to tell you about myself, about who God is. And these are 10 things you should know about what it means to be a human being. And these are 10 things that kind of govern the way we relate to each other, right? That's not what happens, right? What happens is we are told what God does, and in the context of what he does, and he says, we have a sense of who he is, right? And that's pretty similar to how we experience our lives, right? Any of your parents introduce themselves to you? All right, I'm your dad. This is my name, right? And this is what you should know about me, and all of that. And these are the rules of the house, or whatever. Of course not, right? You just kind of grow into it, and without knowing it, you learn to speak and to grapple around and to talk and to walk around. So things basically happen naturally in the context of relationships, in the context of life, right? I came to Germany when I was 15. Originally, I'm from Ethiopia. And when I arrived to Germany many, many years ago, right, I thought, what kind of a language is this, right? You're never going to speak this language. It sounds so rough. I knew 2 or 3 words, which I'm not going to tell you what they are. That was about it, right? And I was going like, how are you ever going to speak this language? Now, many, many, many years ahead, I speak better German than English, for that matter, and I speak better German than my own mother tongue, Amharic, my language in Ethiopia. But if you ask me, Simret, how did it work out, right? I can't tell you. It just happened, right, in the course of time. So that's what I did with that student. We read the fantasy book. We read basically the fairy tale as it was. But what happened was, as we were reading, we noticed that the text and the stories that are shared there are deeply rooted into life, relate to our life so meaningfully and so deeply that a year later, that young lady got baptized, and she said, when I started reading the book, it was just a fairy tale. But now it became my story. And I never made it a point to prove to her that the Bible is right or wrong. In fact, I didn't care, right? Because I believe if we read the stories in their own terms and see where they lead us in their own terms, they are powerful enough. They are existential enough. They are true and real enough to challenge us and to take us places, for that matter. So that story in a nutshell. I would like to ask you a question. And we're going to do some text reading together. If you would think of 3 things that are most important to you in life, what would they be? Just 3 things of which you say, really important to me. Those 3 things? Major aspects or major things in my life, which I really care about. So let's think about that for a moment. And then, looking forward to what 3 things pop up to your mind. You can just share 1 as well, but think about 3 things. 3 things that matter to me most? Family? There we go. Who seconds it? Anybody thought of family? Yeah? All right, there we go. I assumed. So, anything else?
Career.
Career? Where did that come from? All right, career, right? So what you do in life, your contribution in life, right? Thanks.
Truth.
Beg your pardon?
Truth.
Truth, yeah. So, yeah. Friends? Friends. Freedom. Pretty basic. Beg your pardon? God? Yeah, God.
Love has to be dynamic.
I beg your pardon?
Life has to be dynamic. It can't be the same over and over again. You need to have challenges and then you need to step outside your comfort zone.
So the dynamics of life for that matter, right? Yeah.
You can't be static.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks. I've been doing this for the past 10 years, right? And I've asked this question all kinds of people coming from all kinds of backgrounds, for that matter. And many of the things that you said are what I got everywhere, basically. Family, friends, contributing in life, right? Having an impact in this world, and related thoughts like freedom as well, right? And love. Now that said, with that in mind, in a sense that it is not an ideology that informed us to say this, but it is something basically within us, something pretty intuitive for that matter, something which precedes our reflection, but something that really comes naturally to our lives. So, having said that, having this sense of what is important for us, something that we share, for that matter, with people coming from all backgrounds, I would like to read a text with you. So if you have your Bible, let's open it up to Genesis chapter 1. And there I'm going to read starting verse 26. And I'm going to read the text with you based on this idea that we established in the beginning, right? You just read it and see where it takes you. So it's just the text and the text alone that informs us as it unravels, so to speak, right? And we're going to see how it relates to us. So Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 on, and I'll read till the end of the chapter. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And God said, "See, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be for food. Also, to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth in which there is life, I have given every green herb for food." And it was so. Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day. So guys, as we read through the story of creation, and God has been pretty active throughout those days, and we have already mentioned it is a God who seems to be pretty powerful. Yeah, he creates things out of nothing. It is a God who speaks, right? He does not think things into their existence. He speaks them into their existence. So he seems to be a relational God who speaks, and he seems to have a positive relation to the things that he creates, because almost every day after he has created, he says it is good, right? It is good, right? And as I mentioned earlier, he gives names to the things that he creates. He seems to give them personality, and his positive attitude towards what he creates is all the more expressed on the fifth day after he created the fish and the birds. And we hear that he blessed them, right? He blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply. So we seem to be dealing with a God who has a positive attitude towards the things that he creates. He wants them to live and to blossom. And of course, he seems to be a very creative God, because he creates animals in all kinds. He creates fruits and trees in all kinds. So his creativity seems to have no end. And he does not seem to go out of ideas, for that matter, right? And on the sixth day, we are told that for the first time, before God creates something, as he did throughout the days, where he speaks and things happen, we notice that he has a type of a conversation with himself, we would assume, right? Because we read in verse 26, then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. So, what we're going to do now is to take a closer look at the portion of what we read, and we're going to see how it relates to the things that we said in terms of what is really important to us in life as human beings. Are you with me? So based on that idea, I would like to invite you that we do an exploration of the text. So, as I remarked, for the first time, God says what he's planning to do before he actually does it, right? And what does he say? Let us make man in our image. And this indeed is a little irritating as we read it, because God does not say, let me make man, right? Which would kind of make sense. But what does he say? Let us make man. In whose image? In our image. But interestingly, when you actually look at verse 27, in terms of what God actually does, there seems to be a type of contradiction. Because there it says, so God created man in whose image? In his own image. You notice the irritation here? Because it was, let us make man in our image. Now we hear, he made man in his image, right? So we have plural over here. Let us, our image. And here we have singular. God made man in his image. Are you with me? Right? And the same thing or something similar happens on the realm of man as well. Because we read in verse 26, let us make man in our image according to our likeness, and then let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping things that creeps on the earth. Who shall have dominion? Men, right? Let them. Again, we have a plural thing running here in terms of men. So they are supposed to have dominion over all the earth and over all created things in all realms, right? The sea, the air, and the earth. And a similar peculiarity happens with man, because in verse 27, what do we read? So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created, now watch this, him, right? Are you there? He created him. So what do we have here? Plural or singular? We have singular, right? In verse 26, we had plural with men. Let them have dominion, da 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 da. And now in verse 27, we have in the image, God created man, singular, in his image. In the image of God, he created him, right? Singular. And then the next sentence, in verse 27, goes on to say, male and female, he created them. So we have a plural thing running here as well. So, what we're going to take a closer look at now is, if we are told that God creates man in his own image, which seems to be something pretty special, right? This never happened in the course of the creation story. So it's for the first time that God speaks to himself and says, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. So what's going on now is that someone is about to be made who resembles God. And the question that raises itself is, how does man resemble God? And on a very basic level, we hear that God speaks about himself as a let us, which kind of creates the question, who is the let us? You know, whom does it include? Who is he speaking about? And, what's the let us about? Our image? You know, some people suggest that it is a way of a majestic speech that God is holding here. You know, I've mentioned to you that I come from Ethiopia, and there was this emperor in Ethiopia some years ago. Until the 70s, his name is Haile Selassie. Right? So those of you who have an idea about reggae music, you've heard of him, Rastafari, right? So that's where the Rastafarians come from. So he was an Ethiopian emperor, and, you know, our Jamaican friends had this idea of Ethiopia being a free land, so they kind of projected the idea of on this emperor, going like, oh, this emperor is the king of a black nation which has never been enslaved, and so on and so forth. So they kind of related to us. And when that emperor would speak, he would always speak as an us, right? So we say this and we say that. So they call this the majestic plural, right? So one can raise the question, is God speaking of himself as a plural because, you know, God, you know, the big God, so the imperial God, the emperor God. But in a way, that does not really seem to fit because on the one hand, we hear that when God says, let us make man in our image, that in a way it relates to what happens to the human beings that he creates. Because in a way they are spoken of in plural terms, and on the other hand they are spoken of in singular terms. Are you still with me? Yeah, it's like, let us make man in our image, let them have dominion over everything, and male and female, he created them, they are plural. At the same time, we're talking about man who has been created in God's image as a singular. So the question that raises itself here is whether when God speaks about himself in the plural, that in some mysterious way that the God that we're dealing with in Genesis 1 is not alone. Or in other words, it is the singular God, the He, the one who creates in His image. And at the same time, it is the let us make man in our image, the God who in Himself integrates some type of plurality. And how many entities does it take to have plural? At least two, right? Yeah. So this is like the place where many people, especially Christians, would run on and go like, are we talking about the Trinity here? I would like you to refrain from that idea because the text does not give us that. But the text gives us so much that it speaks of a God who is somewhat singular and plural at the same time. Who seems to be one God, but at the same time who integrates some type of a relationship in himself. And when that is taken over to man, we have something similar as well. Man is singular. He's the one who has been created in God's image. Let us create man in our image. And verse 27 again. God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. So man is singular. But at the same time, if you want to know who that man is who is singular, the text tells you, male and female, he created them. It is a they, right? So, what does it mean to be a human being? To be a human being means not to be alone, to be with somebody else, to be relational. So being relational is what makes us human beings in very, very fundamental ways, that the text would even go so far to say that to be man means to be male and female, to be more than one. Just as to be God is to be a let us make man in our image. And at the same time it is God. He creates in his image, right? So God in himself integrates some type of a relationship, and what is integrated in him in some type of way, he implants into human beings, so to speak. So, to be human means to be relational. And in fact, I would not even know that I am human if I did not have you, right? It is through the other person that you become human. It is the other person who shows you who you are. So relationship is the core of what it means to be human. And this is where the rubber meets the road for me. So if we say, when we're asked what is important for you in life, what is it that you cherish most, right? What is it that makes you you? What is it that is most important to you? If we say, of course, my family, my friends, the people I relate to, and if that sounds very natural to you, and if that sounds very natural to everybody, the text would come and say, sure it is. Because God himself is relational, and he made you as a relational being. So, discovering that or relating to that is getting a sense of who you are. And friends, that's where the text, the story, becomes so powerful for me, because it is not some type of top-level philosophy, right? It is something very natural, something which is pretty much integrated in our human experience. The text and our human reality as we experience it are deeply connected. Deeply connected. And the text takes us and says, the reason why you are relational is because God is relational and he made you the way he is. And that's when the God dimension comes in, which has been mentioned already, right? To be a human being means to relate to others and to relate to God. So friends, the implication, and we're going to do one more implication before we go. The first implication is, since God has created us in his image, and since his image is reflected by us being relational, wherever relationship happens, and it happens all over the world, irrespective of where people come from, their religion, their philosophy, or whatever they come from, wherever relationship happens, something divine is happening. Something divine is happening. just by the fact that you and I are there, breathing and relating and living, we are reflecting God's image. I'm going to say more about this tomorrow when we speak about the topic, how to relate to people coming from different religious traditions. It's going to be a very important foundation, right? But where the rubber meets the road means that the biblical story of creation and our human experience relates to each other in deep ways, because being relational as a human being means that we are reflecting God's image wherever we come from. And that, friends, connects us to each other. That connects us to everybody. That connects us to everybody irrespective of what religious background that we bring. So, if you ask your friend who happens to be an atheist or whatever background that person has, and you ask that person the question, what is important to you? And that person says, my family, my friends, of course. Know that you are deeply connected to that person in divine ways. And you can relate to that person and say, that's what the text tells me. The text, the story tells me I'm relational. And that's why I'm relating to that text. Not because I have this preconceived idea of going like, it's the Bible, so it must be true, right? It's kind of the other way around, right? I sense it's true because what I read there connects to me. It relates to me. Are you with me, everybody? So, let us let go of the discussion, is the Bible true or not? Is God there or not? Let's just be real and see, how does the text connect to us? And how does the text connect to others? And let's read it and relate to it that way. And if we do, I believe that we can make lots of experiences, first of all, for ourselves, because it keeps our hearts open and our minds open as we read the text. And secondly, I think it can help us to relate to others because we read the Bible with them as explorers and not as knowers. Are you with me, everybody? That said, the second part of what it means to resemble God's image is integrated in the text. You remember verse 26? Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and then let them have what? Dominion, right? Over the fish, over the birds, and over everything on the earth. And in fact, after God has created them, He blesses them and speaks to them and say, take over this earth. And He tells them, the fruits are for you to eat, and all the herbs are for the animals to eat. So basically, people are called to live in this world. That's where the word which has been mentioned by our friend, career, comes in. Or you can call it something else. One of the things that is really important to us in life is to have some kind of a contribution, isn't it? To do something in this world, to make something out of this world. And that's what we've been doing since the day we're born, right? So we're born, and then we suck on the breast of our mother, and then we grapple, and then we start speaking and walking and learning and doing music and going to school and working, all the things that we've been doing and that we'll continue doing. The text is saying that's the meaning of your life. Or as you do so, you are reflecting God's image. So your life and my life as we live it, irrespective of where we come from, since the day we're born, is reflecting God's image. Because we're speaking and eating and walking and sleeping and learning and doing all kinds of things, right? So the meaning of our lives, or us reflecting God's image or relating to God, is not some mysterious thing that we should find out somewhere. What is God's purpose for me, or what is it all about? Even though we may have these questions. But in a very foundational level, it is integrated on in how we as human beings live since the day that we are born. And there is nobody in this earth who cannot relate to that, because that's how things run, right? Everybody's born, speaks, learns, eats, drinks, sleeps, works. Pretty basic, isn't it? And the text says that's how we reflect God's image. So the difference between you, between us, and those who do not have an experience with the text is that we give this experience that we have as relational beings and as people who live in this world and relate to this world, the context of them coming from God, from our Creator. Right? But the experience itself is pretty similar in many ways, whether we relate to God or do not relate to God. But if you read the text and you notice it is speaking about life as it really is, you notice this is not rocket science, this is not philosophy. It's deeply integrated in life, and it relates to you and to me. Time is up, I guess, but I would like to take a few minutes for your questions. So doing it the German way now, we started 5 minutes later, so I get 5 minutes for free. Or let's do it this way around. Did it make sense what you heard? Can you relate to it in some ways? All right, guys. Then let's land it there. Yeah. I beg your pardon?
The road is what for you? The road, what it is for you?
What it is for me? Well, basically, for me personally, what I shared with you has, exploring it has really transformed the way I see things in many ways. Because I notice it's about basically surviving, right? Surviving in a way, in the relationship texture in which I live, with my family, with my friends, in the work that I do, to try to relate to them as divine happenings, right? And in a way that I notice, how do I, navigate myself through life? And navigating myself through life in my relationships, in my friendships, in my family, in my work, perceiving that as the essence of life, or as the essence of spirituality for that matter. And that's a major change for me because, years back, I would be fascinated by different ideas or doctrines or, philosophies for that matter. And there is a place for that, right? How do we relate to reality, explain life, and debate and understand stuff and discuss different approaches to the world? Interesting stuff. But sometimes, friends, these things can distract us from the essence of life. And the essence of things is basically surviving. So that's where the rubber meets the road for me. All right, guys, then before everybody moves on, I would like to ask you that we say a word of prayer and close. Father in heaven, our God, our Creator, thank you for making us in your image and for loving us. Thank you for letting us know through the story in this book that we are from you and that this life makes sense. That engaging with life, with all its challenges and with all that it brings with it, makes sense. Father in heaven, we pray that you bless us in the things that are important to us, in our families, in our relationships, in the things that we do. And in this moment, we think of the person who had an accident yesterday. We pray that you keep that person. that you help that person to recover, and that you surround the people who around that person, the families and the friends. Father, we are grateful to be in this journey with you and with each other. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, guys, have a good day.